The skill is not in how much you can build, it is in knowing where to stop. Let's dive in. Hey, coach, welcome back. Last week, you listened to a real coaching session that I did with a fellow financial coach named Lauren. If you also downloaded part 2, the strategy half of that conversation, then you've heard the entire conversation. If you haven't heard part 2 yet, you can go listen at financialcoachacademy.com/150 part 2. That's 150 part 2. I'd recommend listening to both before this episode, but you'll still get a lot out of today either way. In last week's intro, I shared something personal about that session. I talked about how well I know Lauren and how that definitely led me to ask more leading questions than I normally would. I was trying to surface context for her instead of letting her surface it herself. I'm not going to belabor that today. Today, I want to do something different. I want to give you 3 things to take away from Lauren's session. 1 for each stage of your development as a coach. Something you can notice if you're just starting out, something you can practice if you've been doing this a while, and something to sit with if you're more experienced and want to sharpen how you think about your own coaching. So let's get into it. Here's takeaway number 1. If you're newer to coaching, here's what I want you to hear in the session. There's a moment in part 1 where I ask Lauren a question that probably sounds simple on the surface. I ask her how she sees her income. Does she see it as one total number, or does she see each source separately? That's it. That was the question. Lauren said, no, I see them all as separate. And I'm pointing that out because that answer changed the trajectory of the entire conversation from there. Lauren, if you remember, had 4 income sources: her coaching business, subcontracting work, serving shifts, and her husband's income. She was seeing every one of them as its own separate little world. And that one answer told me a lot about why she felt stuck. Lauren was sort of seeing each one of her income sources as 4 different problems. That meant she had 4 different sources of stress, with each one needing a separate solution. What I wanted to give Lauren was a way of looking at it as one number with different levers that each gave her flexibility and choice. I think about my businesses the same way. I've shared before how me coaching my clients one-to-one absolutely informs the way I mentor coaches just like you, what I talk about on this podcast, and how I practice the work, and vice versa. Having conversations with coaches make me better for my clients. Operationally, they may be distinct, just like it was for Lauren. How she shows up for her serving job is probably different than her contracting job. Her schedule is different. Her, mindset is different. The way she makes decisions are probably different, but they absolutely serve each other. That's actually a pun. Go figure. Anyway, they are levers, right? And anytime you can introduce different sources of income or different expenses or different opportunities as levers, that is a framework that can drive the rest of your session. And me knowing to do that came from Lauren's answer to the question I asked. If I had skipped asking that question, and let's say I just jumped straight to strategy, we could have built a plan on top of a problem that I didn't fully understand, and neither had Lauren. Here's your takeaway, coach. I want to encourage you to ask neutral questions. Neutral questions are built on curiosity. They are questions where you genuinely do not know which way the client is going to answer. And this can be really tricky for new coaches when we're trying to control the conversation because we're nervous and all we want to do is help. But you're not leading them anywhere when you only ask questions that you feel like you know the answer to. By doing it this way, you're opening a door and seeing what way they walk through it. If you are newer to coaching and you take one thing from Lauren's session, let it be this. Before you coach, before you create a plan, before you offer advice, before you get to strategy, ask a question. And when you ask questions where you genuinely don't know what they're going to say, and then let their answer shape where you go. Don't try and map out the entire session and everything you want to talk about going into the session. If you've been coaching for a while, I want to invite you to reflect on some of your earlier coaching sessions. How much time did you spend preparing before a session? How often did you map out exactly the things you wanted to talk about? And have you let go of that a little bit since? That is a sign of your own growth. Here's the takeaway for you. If you've been coaching for a while, you probably already ask good questions. you know how to listen effectively, and you probably know how to build rapport. So here's where I want to push you a little bit. There is a stretch in Lauren's session where we're trying to figure out whether we should prioritize her emergency fund or IVF savings first. Instead of me saying, I think you should save for your emergency fund first, what I did was set up both paths and walked her through them and then let her tell me what was best for her. I have heard countless times, and I know you have heard it too, where there's an expert that tells someone they should save for their emergency fund first because that's the step they're on. Instead of me telling Lauren, I think you should save for your emergency fund first, notice that I walked Lauren through two scenarios and then I asked her how each one feels. Here's sort of how it went, if you remember. I said, imagine that your income is perfect and you're putting all of your extra money towards your emergency fund first, and you do that until you hit your target and then you switch to saving for your IVF. How does that feel? And Lauren said, that feels right. I have peace of mind. Then I said, now imagine the same thing. Your income is perfect and you're putting all your extra money toward IVF first and then your emergency fund after that. How does that feel? And Lauren paused. Notice I didn't interrupt her. I let her think about it. And she responded, things still feel kind of unsettled. Focusing on that solely doesn't feel right. Lauren made her own choice. Her gut did the work. I didn't tell her what to prioritize. I created the conditions for her to feel the difference and then choose. This is also a demonstration of a moment where buy-in was created. Imagine if I had picked for Lauren instead of her choosing her path for herself. I absolutely would have robbed her of this buy-in. When you give a client the answer, they might comply. But when a client arrives at the answer themselves, they commit. Compliance is fragile, but commitment can last. That's buy-in. And I want to acknowledge just how tempting it can be to just tell them the answer, especially when you feel as if you can see it so clearly. The walk it forward technique takes longer, and it does require a little bit more patience. But the difference for what the client experiences is so worth it. They walk away owning the decision instead of simply borrowing yours. The walk it forward technique is where you paint a picture of the client's options, and then you ask them to step into each one. And then you ask, how does that one feel? Not, what do you think? How does this feel? Because the gut is faster than the brain at knowing what's right, especially for decisions that are emotionally loaded. In your next session, where a client is stuck between a couple of different paths, I want you to try this technique. Don't tell them which one. Walk them through their options and let them feel the difference. No matter where you are in your coaching experience, here's a suggestion for you. I actually introduced the Walk It Forward technique in episode 134, my Inside the Session episode, where I broke down Marianne's coaching session. Go back and listen to that episode because I talked about sort of the theory and the practice and the concept of Walk It Forward. But in this episode with Lauren, you get to hear it in practice. And seeing both of those things side by side will hopefully help you to have a very well-rounded perspective of this technique, not just the theory, but how it actually shows up in real life in your coaching conversations. Now, this next observation is for more of the experienced coaches. If you've been doing this work for a while, then you've probably gotten really good at building plans. You can map out a client's entire financial picture, create a detailed path forward, give timelines and benchmarks and milestones, and that is a real skill. And it is becoming even easier now with AI, which can bust out all of those things with just a simple command. But this is also a trap. Notice that at the end of part 2, I did not give Lauren a date for leaving her serving job. We did not build out a quarterly plan. Lauren named her next few decisions, her 2 lead gen sources, when she was going to reduce her shifts, and a client capacity number. But we left the rest open. And notice what Lauren said. Lauren said, freaking nailed it, right? I've shared before how financial professionals can approach decisions differently than the clients we're trying to serve. How we will oftentimes prefer a lot of detail or a carefully laid out plan, but how those things are the exact things that can create overwhelm for our clients. Too much detail, for example, can create confusion and actually indecisiveness. And clients have actually shared with me that a plan is often seen as a list of ways in which they could fail. I talk a lot about those differences in episode 131. So go and listen to the technique element of that so that you can see it in practice in Lauren's episode, just like I instructed you to do for the Walk It Forward technique. Keep in mind, these are always generalizations because Lauren is a fellow financial coach herself. And yet, here's what she told us at the very beginning of the session. She said that pressure shuts her down. She said she didn't want things to be over constructed, and she specifically asked for flexibility. So when we got to the end and had the priority, which was emergency first, IVF second, we had an income framework, which was one number pulling different levers at different times. And we had her business focus, which was 2 lead gen sources and some milestones for reducing her shifts. I stopped. I did not give her an exact date for leaving her serving job. I did not build out a month by month plan. I did not create or give her a spreadsheet because doing any of those things would have been coaching for me, not for her. Those are not things that Lauren asked for. When she asked for clarity at the start of the session, she doesn't need that level of clarity where it is so overly constructed and detailed that she loses flexibility. She wanted a path forward, which was what we gave her. She did not necessarily ask for a detailed plan. Experienced coaches have an ability to keep going. We can always deliver more and more and more. We can always add more structure, more detail, and more specificity. The question that I want you pondering and the judgment call I need you to make real time is whether that is what your client needs you to do. That is a calibration question, not a content question. Over structuring a plan for a client who explicitly tells us that pressure shuts them down is just as much a coaching miss as under structuring. Sometimes I know that we do this because it helps us to feel better about the value we're delivering. But the skill is not in how much you can build. You're not trying to prove that to yourself. It is in knowing where to stop. Lauren didn't say freaking nailed it because we mapped out everything. She said it because the right decisions were made and the rest was left to her to own. That's trust. That's what good coaching earns. And if you're an experienced coach, that tells me you probably have clients who have been working with you for a while. They're in one of those later stages that we talked about in a previous episode. What they need from you is not too much structure. They need flexibility to make decisions and see what happens. So if you are an experienced coach, here is my challenge for you. In your next session, I want you to notice the moment where you could keep building the plan, but the client already has what they need. And I want you to stop. I want you to see what happens when you trust them to take the next step without you mapping it out for them. So there are your 3 takeaways from Lauren's session. If you're just starting out, ask neutral questions and let the answers shape where you go. Don't prepare too much for every session you're about to have with a client. If you've been at this for a while, stop giving the answer. Walk them forward through their options so that you're creating the conditions for your client to find the answer for themselves. And if you're more experienced, know where to stop building the plan. Trust your clients to own what comes next. What I love about these 3 takeaways is that they're not really 3 separate skills. They're the same skill, just at different stages. They all take listening. They all require paying attention to what the client actually needs versus what you might be tempted to give them. You're able to notice the nuance because some of the skills that you were learning at first when you just started coaching are second nature to you, which means you're able to pay attention to even more specific cues that the client gives you. This is the exact kind of work we do inside the Money Made Human Advisory Group. We watch real sessions. We notice what's happening. We have meaty, robust discussions about it. And then we sharpen how we see our own coaching. If that resonates with you, I would love for you to apply for the Money Made Human Advisory Group that we have open right now. If you'd like to join me in doing that kind of work, you can go to financialcoachacademy.com/MMH. If you have not listened to part 2 of Lauren's session yet, the strategy half where we built the income framework and the business plan, you can download it at financialcoachacademy.com 150 part 2, 150 part 2. In fact, even if you've already listened to it, I would recommend listening again if any or all of these takeaways really resonated with you, because you'll hear exactly what I mean about knowing where to stop when building the plan, walking it forward to create choice, and all the questions I asked to best coach Lauren. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and I will see you next week, Coach. That's all for today. If you're ready to grow your own financial coaching business, head over to financialcoachacademy.com for helpful resources and tools. If this episode helped you, hit subscribe and leave us a review. I'll see you next week.